So today, just a little bit about what we're going over. We're going to be talking specifically about paper records in your office. Digital storage and preservation is a totally different can of worms, and we know that everyone struggles with storage of their older records. So today we're going to be focused on the 5 W's and 1 H of paper record storage. The what, where, when, who, why, and how. This webinar is meant to be an introduction, so if you have deeper questions or more specific circumstances, please contact us after the webinar so we can give you the attention your question deserves. If you have a point of clarification or general question at any point in the webinar, please use the questions pane and let me know. To kick off, let's talk about the what of storage and preservation. We're going to talk about what records you need to be most concerned about and what to do about them if they're past retention or inactive. First things first, let's get to know your records. Of course, all of your records are stored in some fashion, but did you know that the law requires better storage conditions for records that are long-term and permanent? It's true. We'll go over those requirements a little bit later in the presentation, but for right now, let's think about the records that are most likely to need the most consideration when it comes to storage. Essential records. These records make up only a small portion of a government's records, but they are important in the event of an emergency or business shutdown. Unlike other records, essential records allow your organization to continue or restore operations during or after a disaster. They need to be undamaged and accessible as quickly as possible after the event has passed. We strongly recommend storing backups of all of your essential records in an off-site location. The State Records Center actually has an entire vault, flame retardant and protected against water, that is especially built for these kinds of vital records. You're welcome to store your records with other vendors or locations. Just make sure they meet all state requirements for storage before signing any contracts. Permanent records. Obviously, this one is a little self-explanatory, but any record that has a retention period of permanent on your schedule will need long-term storage. Are you prepared to house that paper record for the next 100 years? What about the next 200 years? Are you doing everything you can to make sure that the record survives that long? Are you not sure? That's okay. We'll figure it out together today. Finally, there are other important or long-term records in your office. By legal definition, any record that has a mandated retention longer than 10 years is considered a long-term record. Long-term records need to be kept in storage facilities that meet more requirements than short-term records, because the state wants to make sure that these long-term records are around and accessible for their entire retention. In addition to the long-term records that are required by law, your office might also have a handful of other important records that have shorter retention periods, but that your office has elected to keep long-term. All other records are probably short-term and already have good homes in your office. Part of a strong filing plan is to know exactly where all of your files should be stored and kept and for what period of time. Once you've identified the records that are most important to your agency, you'll also need to consider that among some of the long-term and permanent files, there will be a large number of what we consider to be inactive. This means that there is rarely or never a business use for the record, but its legal retention mandates that you keep it longer than 10 years or permanently. Every office has those boxes of files that sit in the back corner that no one is really sure what to do with. First, of course, make sure that the files really are long-term or permanent, and then consider moving them to a low-traffic area or potentially off-site. So how do you know the difference between active and inactive? An active record is something that you need for day-to-day operations, or at least every few months. Records considered inactive are the ones that are only accessed maybe once a year or fewer. Think about all those minutes from past meetings that are maybe sitting around your office. You can't get rid of them because retention of meeting minutes is permanent, but you rarely to never need to access minutes that are more than a year or two old. For these types of records, we recommend that you develop an internal policy to keep them on site for a certain number of years, say 3 years in this case. and then after 3 years, transfer them to off-site storage where they can live permanently. The amount of time that you keep them on-site and then transfer to off-site would be completely up to your agency or government. You are never required to store anything off-site if you don't feel it's necessary, but it's a major space saver and it's not as expensive as you might think. Are there any records that you're storing that have met their retention? Do you have a legitimate business reason for keeping them past their retention? We talk to a lot of different governments and agencies on a daily basis in our consulting work, and one of our most commonly heard refrains is, well, I have all these boxes of records and nobody knows what they are, so we just keep them. Or worse, once I heard from a new RMO that the person who had held the office before her had a policy of keeping everything for 5 or 50 years. This is a randomized approach to retention, and it will only lead to stress and possible legal liability down the road. So obviously the answer to the latter problem is to immediately forget the nonsense that is a 5 or 50-year retention plan and start following TSLAC's schedules. But what about the first scenario? It might not be a stretch for most of you to imagine that exact situation. You, the faithful RMO, versus tens or even hundreds of unlabeled boxes of records that have never been inventoried. You don't know anything about their contents or even if you need them. So what do? First, don't get discouraged. TSLAC has many resources to help you conduct an inventory. Take it slow if you need to and envision how much space you can free up if you identify all of those records that are past their retention. If you're having trouble identifying some of those records, let your analysts know, and they can help find the right series for it. Chances are you'll find plenty of records that can be dispositioned. This sort of project might not be a first priority in your office, and that's okay. But it can be something that you do piecemeal over time, and you'll chip away at those unlabeled boxes in no time. If you do decide to keep a record longer than its retention period, you are responsible for taking care of it and maintaining it like you would any other record. As long as it's in your possession, it can still be subject to a Public Information Act request or litigation. So don't neglect these records and only keep them if they are truly necessary or helpful to your office. Also consider the potential cost of keeping a record beyond its retention versus the benefit of keeping it. A quick recap, before you assess your storage situation, you have to get to know your records and identify if they are essential, long-term, or permanent. These are your priority records, and remember, if you ever need help classifying a record, your analyst at TSLAC is here to help. So let's talk about the all-important where of storage and preservation now. This is the most pressing question for many of you, and it's also the most well covered in our laws and rules about storage. I'm going to cover your legal responsibilities for storage facilities and then some other best practices. TSLAC has several minimum standards that your storage facilities need to meet in order to be in compliance with the law. These standards have been published as one of our local government bulletins, Bulletin F. It is accessible and can be viewed and printed from our website. You can follow that bit.ly link at the bottom or just visit our website at any time. A few general rules about these guidelines. These storage standards only apply to court records prior to 1951 and permanent records. The requirements of this subchapter apply only to records in storage and are not required for records that are currently being transported, temporarily housed, or are active use records. These standards also only apply to paper records. Storage requirements for government records stored micrographically or electronically are adopted under other administrative rules found in Bulletin A and Bulletin B, respectively. If you have trouble navigating which bulletin is going to be applicable to your situation, just ask us. All right. So the first requirement is to provide a storage facility that's protected from environmental hazards and unauthorized access. Remember that these are often historically significant records that you're keeping permanently, and if they're lost or stolen, they're usually impossible to reproduce. Sometimes people will steal vital records like birth certificates because they can use them in identity theft. For those of you with reading rooms or areas where the public can use your materials, it's good practice to establish rules for how people will access records. It's also a good idea to establish rules on proper handling of materials. When researchers are using your materials, they should be monitored by a staff member at all times. Secondly, your storage facility must protect your records from direct exposure to sunlight and other harmful light sources. Sunlight is the worst type of light for your records, and you can help protect the records and control the amount of light your records are exposed to by simply putting up blinds or drapes in any of your windows that the record storage area has. For records that are stored loosely on shelves, simply storing these in boxes will help significantly because it will protect them from all of that light. The third requirement is that records or storage boxes should not be stored in contact with the floor. I know that's a lot to ask out of some of you. It's a requirement because water is the #1 cause of damage to records. So if there's any flooding in your storage area, raising records off the floor provides a small little cushion of protection for them. Most shelving is equipped with a space between the floor and the lowest shelf. So if you do have boxes on the floor, you can simply use like a wooden pallet or something like that to get them off the ground. These last two requirements that I'm going to cover only apply to structures that are built after April 7th, 2015. So for a lot of you, these are kind of just recommendations and not requirements. So first, records stored in a building or storage area constructed after that date must have an operational fire detection system, or the facility must be in compliance with local fire codes. And records cannot be stored in any area of a building that is located in a 100-year floodplain area, unless the floor of the storage area is at least 5 feet above the 100-year flood level. How do you know if you live in a 100-year floodplain area? Go to your community's planning, engineering, or permit office, and they can help you out with some research on that. Again, these last two requirements are only requirements for new construction after April 7th, 2015. They don't apply to pre-existing structures, and they're just best practices and recommendations in that case. Some other optimal storage conditions that we recommend but are not required. We recommend that you have an active fire suppressant system. We also recommend that you store your records in acid-free containers whenever possible because it provides a lot of extra protection. And then we also strongly recommend that you have some sort of routine pest management program. You can pay for this service, or if you remember some simple solutions, you can do a lot yourself. Just like don't allow any food or drink in the storage area, keep your trash in sealed containers only, and remove all trash daily. It will go a long way in helping to manage any rodents or other creepy crawlies. Additionally, we recommend that all of your storage areas be equipped with appropriate shelving. By appropriate shelving, we mean that shelving should be constructed of metal or other non-porous material. You want to avoid using wooden shelving if possible because it's prone to warping, rotting, it can get pest infestations, and it can also, of course, burn. Also, wood can generate harmful peroxides that will eventually eat at your records. You might not know this, but fluorescent light is not much better for your records than sunlight, so we recommend using low UV bulbs if possible, or buying UV filtering film or sleeves to put over any fluorescent lights that are in your storage area. This film can be bought just about anywhere. A local hardware store will have it. And then your records should be stored in a building or storage area that has environmental controls that you can maintain. We recommend a maximum temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit and a constant relative humidity of 45 degrees. You can buy data loggers that can monitor all of these things, so you don't have to just guess at what 45% humidity is. These can be ordered online or, again, picked up at a local hardware store. We also recommend a positive atmospheric pressure to be maintained in the storage area. What the heck does that mean? Well, for example, when you open a door, you can usually feel air coming in from the outside. That means you have negative pressure. The goal is to have positive pressure. So when you open a door, instead of air coming in, you actually feel the air going out. So it's pushing against you. This helps keep dust and particles from entering the building or storage area and settling on your records. So if all of those requirements are just kind of making your head spin, that's okay. Remember, they're all published in Bulletin F, even the recommendations, and it's accessible on our website. Let's talk a little bit more about temperature controls before moving on. High temperatures speed up deterioration and cause records to break down. And the hotter it gets, the faster your records break down. For every 18-degree increase in temperature, the rate of deterioration doubles. So let's say, for example, your storage area is 60 degrees in winter and 100 degrees in summer. That means that the rate of deterioration quadruples during the summer. Humidity is another double-edged sword. High humidity breeds mold and attracts insects. Low humidity allows documents to grow brittle and even desiccated over time. Mold, as you might know, is very difficult to remediate. It spreads quickly and quietly, and it's very expensive to get rid of once it's entered into your collection. You have a responsibility to provide a clean and well-maintained facility to house any of your government records. Aside from meeting certain building and environmental standards, you also need to develop a regular and enforced inspection of the facilities to ensure that not only are those building standards being continually met, but that your premises are clear of unwanted pests or other potential hazards, like dripping water from an air conditioning vent or direct sunlight on open shelving. Without an active inspection on a regular basis, how would you know if any of your records were being damaged until it's too late? So try to inspect your storage areas, especially the lower traffic areas, at least once a month if possible. Develop a small checklist for things that you should be looking for. Some suggested questions: are there any noticeable signs of pests or rodents? As a rule of thumb, just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there. In fact, we recommend that you assume that they are there and take preventative measures to deter them on a regular basis. Or you might just come into work and find a present from them one day. In addition to eating holes in your records, insects and rodents will also leave their droppings, their eggs, and eventually their corpses in your records. These things are hard to clean, and really, nobody wants to. Besides that yuck factor, those biological materials decomposing and breaking down will release chemicals that can really harm your records. You should look for any signs of sitting water on the floor or stains on ceiling tiles. That could be a sign of more extensive damage or a leaking pipe in your walls that could one day burst and destroy your records. Is the room protected from direct sunlight? Sunlight can quickly damage records if they're exposed for even a few hours. Have your items been reshelved or stored properly? You can cause a lot of damage if you store bound volumes on their side with the spine in the air. So always shelve them upright on the shelf or lay them down if they're oversized. This will reduce any stress on the binding and the volume will last longer. If you're storing documents in boxes, do try to make sure that they're acid-free, just to ensure that no damage is done to paper. Over time, regular boxes have chemicals that will leach into documents and cause discoloration and other damage. And are you protected against hazards like fire, flooding, or something worse? Have you visualized what would happen if your building caught on fire or was faced with a flood? Are all notification alarm systems up and running? Does your office have an emergency plan posted in a visible place? What other steps can you take to ensure the protection of your documents in case of an emergency that takes you away from them? These questions will vary depending on the space you're inspecting, but hopefully these can be a starting point for you. A quick recap of that section. Make sure you meet at least the minimum storage standards for your permanent and long-term records, required by law in Bulletin B published on our website. If you can, consider some more optimal storage conditions to start implementing. It's okay to start small. So the answer to the question when it comes to storage might seem like it should be yesterday, but don't worry, we know that that might not be the case for you. Let's go over some strategies for at least getting started today with small, manageable steps. The time to begin preservation of your documents is now. There is such a thing as too late when it comes to preserving records. Don't let time pass you and your office by because you weren't taking your responsibility seriously enough. Even if you can't implement every idea or storage standard we talk about today, it's vitally important that you start somewhere, anywhere. Maybe your storage facility has never had regular pest control. Schedule a visit today. Maybe you're looking around and realizing that you have naked fluorescent bulbs everywhere in your facility. Those UV covered I mentioned earlier are available for cheap at your local store. Have a window letting sunlight into your storage area? Easy. Just put some cardboard up in the window until you're able to get better solutions like light blocking curtains. Preservation is an ongoing and continuous project that's never over or complete. So please engage your colleagues in helping you out with some small project to get you going today. Here at the State Library, we get a little twitchy when you want to keep non-permanent records permanently. We have a good reason. It costs you a lot of money. They're subject to Public Information Request Act, even if they've met their retention. They're subject to litigation. The list goes on and on. It costs you a lot of money for you to store those records. So it may seem like small change at an individual level, but those costs start adding up quickly over time. As you add more and more records to the pile, you're accruing costs for things that you don't even really need to keep. So for example, let's say you have about 50 boxes worth of workers' comp claims dating back into at least the 1970s. They only have a retention of 5 years, but you don't really feel comfortable throwing them away because what if someone needed that documentation later down the line? Instead, you make that decision to send those 50 boxes of claims to offsite storage and forget about them. Each box only costs about 24 cents a month to store, and that's a deal for peace of mind, right? So storing 50 boxes over the course of 30 years at a place like the State Records Center would cost you in the neighborhood of $4,500. That's assuming that you never need those records and never take them out in 30 years. However, if you have a record and someone requests it through the Public Information Act request, you must produce it in a timely manner. Let's say that someone catches wind of a series of workers' comp claims that happened over the course of a few years and they want copies of each claim. You check your inventory and see they're in storage, but they're scattered in several different boxes. You have to either go through the effort of sifting through each of those boxes yourself or surrendering them over to legal discovery and paying for a lawyer to do it for you. And to think this all could have been avoided if you had simply destroyed those records after 5 years when they were eligible for disposition. You could have saved your office over $5,000 and the time and effort involved in Public Information Act requests because when that person asked for workers' comp claims from the 70s or 80s, the answer would have been as simple as, sorry, those only have a retention of 5 years, so we got rid of them years ago. To sum up here, ensure that you're taking care of disposition in a timely and efficient manner to fight the backlog. Let's talk about the who of storage now. We'll talk about getting staff on board with basic best handling practices, vendors, and secure access. This is a vital step for any office that is often overlooked. When handling your paper records that need to be kept for long-term or permanently, is your staff taking steps to conserve the documents? If it's a document that might incur heavy use, your office should consider making a convenience copy that can be for everyday use and keeping the original in storage. If you do need to handle older, more fragile documents, do so with extreme care and use gloves so the oil from your hands don't come in contact with the paper. Make sure that all employees are aware of proper storage of documents to prevent unintentional damage by incorrect storage techniques. Don't leave sticky notes, tape, or paper clips on files that are not in current use. These things damage paper over time, so before any item is refiled or put in storage, make sure that employees are removing all clips, tape, and sticky notes. If a file needs to be kept together, put it in a folder. Your ultimate goal should be to create what we call a culture of conservation within your office. Engage your employees in the process of storage and conservation of your records, because the more people that understand the importance of proper handling and storage, the better your records will be conserved for future generations. It's unlikely that the records management officer can realistically keep track of every single record at all times, and you need to know where your records are, but one person can't bear that burden alone. We recommend making your everyday employees aware that they are records custodians. The benefits of clearly defining a custodian for each type of record are numerous. By making someone aware that they are a records custodian, you're also including them in the overall records management program and giving them a reason to buy into your policies and procedures. A little responsibility delegated to individual employees can go a long way towards making your program successful. A great way to start is to take a look at your last records inventory and determine the individual custodian or department that should be responsible for each record listed on that inventory. There will be some records, like general correspondence, that will be on the individual level, meaning the employee who wrote the email is responsible for retaining it throughout its life. While other records, like timesheets, might be assigned to a particular position within your government, like the payroll manager of human resources. If your office or agency is responsible for records that are confidential or sensitive, they should be kept in secure, limited access areas. Use of the documents should be restricted and monitored to make sure that only people with authorization can use them. This can be done by literally locking them up or by placing them in someone's office who acts as a guardian of the records. TSLAC offers many services to help you with your storage and preservation needs, ranging from filming to storage solutions. That said, it's perfectly accessible to shop around to other vendors. If you choose to go with a vendor, TSLAC can't offer any official recommendations or assistance with your selections. There are some general guidelines that you should keep in mind, however. All files stored off-site or in the cloud must be kept for their full retention, so make sure that it's stipulated in your contract and clearly communicated to the vendors. Even vendors must adhere to our Bulletin F's guidelines for proper storage of state records. Arrange a tour of the storage facilities before sending your records there. And if you plan on using a vendor to digitize important or long-term records, please review Bulletin B and be very careful to do quality control before destroying any original paper records. So to recap again, let your staff in on their responsibility to protect and preserve the records that your office has. And of course, choose your partners in storage and other projects carefully and make sure they understand your legal responsibility to the records. We've already talked a lot about what Bulletin F contains. That was all of our storage guidelines from earlier, and that's a big part of the why of storage and preservation. Easy, it's the law. But there are a lot of other reasons why you should be on board with better storage practices. Hopefully I don't have to hard sell you on this one. By properly caring for and storing your government's records, you're ensuring that future generations of Texans will have access to records of historical significance. I used to work in genealogy here at the State Library, and sometimes our patrons would be stuck for months in their searches until they came across the smallest scrap of paper with a relative's name on it buried somewhere in the county records archives we hold here. This evidence could open doors in their histories that they didn't know existed, all because some clerk many decades ago carefully preserved those records. By preserving your records properly today, you make sure those little discoveries continue to happen. When you're justifying storage costs to your boss or commission, it's a great idea to come prepared with some cost analysis. To show the benefit of storing records off-site, we sometimes use the metric of how much square footage costs in your office versus the same amount that it would cost in a storage facility. You'll usually find some convincing numbers there. For example, according to a 2016 sales trend report published by LoopNet, the average asking price of a single square foot of office space in downtown Austin was $230. For comparison, the State Records Center charges you just $2.40 per year for each square foot of space. That's $227 that you just saved in space. Having a better storage plan is also going to make it easier to find your records, and your staff will be spending less time and less of your money for searching through documents or boxes. Again, these standards are published on our website as Local Government Bulletin F. It's accessible and can be viewed and printed from the website. A little bit of history about these laws. TSLAC was charged in the late 1990s with the task of helping local and state governments across the state with records management. And some of the first laws and bulletins started to roll out in the late 90s. Fast forward several years, and in 2009, the Supreme Court of Texas created the Texas Court Records Preservation Task Force and charged it with collecting data from counties and other state and local agencies across the state on the current status of Texas court records and related preservation activities. They wanted to identify important needs and areas of concern with regard to the protection of those court records, including but not limited to security issues and just like the overall quality of the records over time. The eventual result of this task force was a bill that was approved and took effect September 1st, 2011. The bill authorized the State Library to establish standards for the retention, storage, and destruction of certain court documents, which led to what is now Bulletin F. Although parts of Bulletin F apply only to court documents and other permanent records, TSLAC had been previously charged with the mission of protecting all state records, which is why the bulletin is a little wider in scope. So these are all sort of easy reasons, right? Most importantly, it is the law to properly preserve and store your government records. By being a good guardian today, you're helping generations of citizens down the line. At this point in the webinar, I know you might be thinking, this is great and all, but how in the world am I supposed to do any of this in my office? There's no way I'll get buy-in to install this or buy that or get funding to get a new facility. We understand that those are all real problems for you guys. At TSLAC, we're here to help you, and so we have some tips to get started to put you in motion. Sometimes the best thing that you can do for yourself is to seek advice and input from colleagues in similar positions. Reach out to other RMOs or people in similar positions to yours by utilizing connections through professional organizations. Someone out there has probably gone through any problem you could name and found a solution that they can share with you. You just have to ask. Professional organizations for your position, like a county clerks association, are great starting points. Also consider joining or attending an ARMA, the Association of Records Managers and Administrators event. They have several very active chapters in Texas with educational conferences on records management topics, and will connect you with other RMOs across the state and beyond. You can usually find a TSLAC analyst at a couple of them around Austin. Fortunately, if you are a county and district clerk, you are already in a position to collect fees for the preservation of records. There are two records management and preservation fees. One is an optional fee for all non-court documents filed for record by the county clerk. The other is a mandatory fee for county and district clerks for court documents. County clerk's record archive fee is another optional fee for county clerks to collect for non-court document filings. All of the funds collected through these fees can be used to bolster your records management program, including storage facilities. I know that not all of you are lucky enough to be a county or district clerk. So for those of you who are in non-clerk governments, the National Endowment for Humanities, or NEH, does preservation assistant grants for smaller institutions. The grant fund can be applied towards storage furniture, housing supplies, environmental monitoring equipment, education training, or a preservation study. There is precedent for Texas local governments applying for and getting these grants. We know of at least 2 governments who've gotten them, including Lavaca County a couple years ago. You can find out more about this grant and apply online at their website. It's neh.gov, and there are other grants out there in the world for storage and preservation as well. Just reach out to some of those professional organizations. So for this section, I really wanted to reassure you that number one, you're not alone, and it doesn't have to be you against the world here. Talk to your colleagues and use their experience to your advantage. Number 2, funding is out there, even if it seems elusive. Keep trying with your local government and remind them gently that it is the law. So we're going to wrap up with a few additional resources that you may or may not already be aware of. TSLAC is here to help you in your records management roles, whatever they may be, so please use any of the channels I'm about to mention to reach out to us. Follow our blog, The Texas Record, for all sorts of great content, including analyst tips, trending topics in records management, and any legislative updates we might have about records retention laws. We do offer a variety of training, both face-to-face and online. We have a great series of archived webinars. Each is around an hour in length, and all of them are free and can be accessed at any time. If after all of this, all you want to do is to speak to one of us in person, you can contact us at any of these 3 main ways. You can find out which one of us is assigned to your region at the link on the slide. You can also call our main phone line or email us, and you'll be routed to the correct analyst that way as well. And with that, I want to thank you for attending. We're going to stay on the line if any of you guys have questions. Okay, do we have any questions?
Yes. The first one is, our facility was not built after April 7th, 2015, nor do we know much about the 100-year flood plain. So what happens in that situation since it wasn't built after?
So if your storage facility was built prior to April 7th, 2015, those 2 requirements, the fire detection system and the floodplain rule, actually don't apply to your building. They only apply to structures that are built after that 2015 date. If you do have like a concern about being in a floodplain area, I would check with like your city planning office or like a county engineering office to see what they have to say about the land that your facility is currently sitting on.
Also, we are using normal filing boxes for storing records and not the acid-free containers for records. And we have some boxes that are left on the floor due to lack of space.
So again, the acid-free containers, it's not actually a requirement by law. It's just a strong recommendation because regular boxes will eventually like leach harmful chemicals into the records and can cause a lot of deterioration. If you have any boxes stored on the floor, I would make sure that the records are not permanent or long-term. Those are the records that are required to be stored off of the floor. If they're short-term records, you can get away with storing them on the floor. It's just not really recommended.
Okay, and that looks like that's all we have for questions.
Awesome. If you guys do come up with any other questions, it's okay to just shoot us an email. Thank you for attending and for your patience as we had a little bit of technical difficulties this morning. Hope you have a great day.